Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Legal Learning. My name is Victoria Sexton. I'm an attorney here at Coast to Coast Legal Aid of South Florida, and I represent survivors of human trafficking and civil litigation and expungement cases. And as everyone knows, January is National Human Trafficking Prevention Month. And today I have two amazing guests here with me. I have Assistant State Attorney Danielle Lennox, who works at the Broward County State Attorney's Office and who is in the head of the Human Trafficking Prosecution Division. And I have Sergeant Atina Johnson, who is the lead task force officer for the Broward Human Trafficking Taskforce, which is co-partnered between the Lauderhill Police Department and the FBI. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And today we wanted to talk about a question that I get a lot from my clients and from victims. What does the reporting process look like for survivors of human trafficking? Whether it's reporting to law enforcement or into a prosecution office, what does that look like and kind of how does that timeline work? So I wanted to start off by having Sergeant Johnson tell us a little bit about her role.
So right now I'm assigned to the Broward Human Trafficking Taskforce, and we receive complaints from a variety of sources. Sometimes we receive complaints directly from the Department of Children and Families. We've received complaints from Polaris. We've received complaints from different jurisdictions, different police departments. So there's not one particular way that the complaints get filtered in. Generally speaking, if it's something related to human trafficking, it will go to the Broward Human Trafficking the Broward Human Trafficking coordinator, who is Jamaro Johnson, and she'll filter it to the task force. So there's not really one way it gets reported. What I'd like to tell people is that there are so many hotline numbers where you can report human trafficking. I know FDLE has a hotline number. There's the National Human Trafficking Hotline number, and that can be very cumbersome to remember. So for people who are in danger or believe that they're being trafficked, I think the easiest way is to just always just dial 911. And whatever local police department responds, they can point that person in the right direction so that they're not confused. 911 will never fail them. So generally, once we receive that information on the task force, we kind of filter out where it may have occurred to see if we have the proper jurisdiction. If we don't have the proper jurisdiction, we can contact the victim or the reportee to try to figure out where best to send that tip to so that they are getting the help that they need. So that's the first step, is trying to find out where it happened and who was the proper person that should be investigating it. Because the victim may be in Broward County, but maybe she was trafficked 3 months ago. And when she was trafficked, she was located in Miami-Dade or in Tampa. So those are kind of key things that we have to inquire with the first step, because the last thing that we want to do is, start an investigation and then have to transfer the case somewhere else. And, the victim has to tell the story all over again. And repeating that can be very traumatizing for them.
Okay. And so when, say I have a client and she discloses to me or he discloses to me that he wants to report, would I contact Jamaro and you? Would I contact Danielle first? How does that normally work?
So if you had a client that wanted to report human trafficking, you can go directly to me. Jamaro is kind of the middle person because she is the anti-human trafficking coordinator. So she does filter a lot of those complaints, but I imagine it can be very burdensome for her. Obviously, she has other responsibilities. So sometimes it's okay to cut out the middleman unless you're not quite sure where it should go. But if you know that something happened in the Broward County area, you can always send that to me. And because I'm on the task force, the FBI actually covers Broward County and Miami-Dade, and we do have local partners with Miami-Dade. So it's very easy for us to send information to their task force so that, the victim doesn't have to try to figure out where should it go. So if you know that something happened in this area, you can always contact me directly and we can, see how best to handle that information.
Okay. And I would also just like to add that sometimes I get tips, and what I do with a tip, no matter what it is, I send it to the FBI, I send it to the task force. Sergeant Johnson's on those emails, the FBI's on those emails. So no matter who it gets to, whether that's me or Sergeant Johnson or, somebody in my office or law enforcement, it's always going to find its way to the right people.
Okay, awesome. And can we talk a little bit about what reporting would look like? So, is a survivor coming to you? Are you coming to them? Are they allowed to have a victim advocate with them? Are they allowed to have their victim rights attorney with them?
So we try to make it as comfortable as possible for victims because we do take a trauma-centered approach. Um, Sometimes bringing a victim to a police department may not be the best option. A lot of times they may fear that their trafficker might find out that they're at the police department. I've talked to people who just don't want to come to the police department, and that's perfectly fine. And I tell, victims, we can sit in my car, we can go to the police department, I can come to your home. So really we try to put it, interview them in an environment where it's comfortable for them, because it's not, this is difficult stuff to talk about. It's dark stuff to talk about, and we don't want them to be in a very uncomfortable environment where they're a little bit more closed off. Now, if the victim is a minor, that changes things, and they're normally interviewed. If they're interviewed at Nancy J. Cotterman Center, or if it's an FBI forensic interview, they are interviewed at the FBI office, but it's obviously still not done by an agent or a task force officer. It's done by someone certified to do forensic interviews.
Okay. And how about with you, Ms. Lennox? Are you interviewing at your office? How does that work?
I would say the same thing. I mean, I like my office. I think my office is welcoming. It's not in the courthouse. It's in a building different from the courthouse. So that's sometimes a little more comfortable. I'm happy to interview people in my office. I'm happy to interview people on Zoom, even if they want to have a conversation with me and they want to do it in the privacy of their own home. I can have that conversation on Zoom. I met with a victim at the beach once. We went to a pavilion at the beach and just sat there, and that was her comfort. That was where she was comfortable. That's where she felt like she could talk to me about this stuff, and that's where I met with her. So yeah, it's at the end of the day, we take a trauma-centered approach. We want to make sure that when our survivors are having to discuss this stuff, they're in an environment that they're comfortable in, and that they know that they can trust us with that information.
And I would also like to add, we don't discourage victims from bringing someone that can be their support system. But if they're not going to be a victim advocates are always welcome at interviews. But if it's not going to be a victim's advocate, it should be someone that maybe is aware of what they're going through, because sometimes it can be very, victims may be hesitant to recount all the facts about what they've gone through if they feel embarrassed. So it needs to be somebody that they can truly be comfortable with. Or I would suggest maybe just bringing a victim's advocate or no one.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that I know Danielle and I have in the past done Zoom meetings, and my clients have felt so much more relaxed with that, not having to go in court to testify for certain things, just being able to talk to her under oath and kind of talking through whatever it is the issue that we need to cover has been extremely helpful. So I definitely appreciate that. In regards to why it's so important in these cases to have victims that are willing to testify or willing to provide evidence, can you both discuss a little bit about how this is a little bit different than other cases where maybe there's other types of evidence available? With human trafficking cases, I know in particular that victim testimony is pivotal oftentimes to secure a prosecution.
So I'll speak about a case that I currently have ongoing, and I won't get into, the specifics, but sometimes human trafficking cases can intertwine other offenses as well, right? So I had a human trafficking case. We weren't able to move forward with federal charges for human trafficking, but we did file state charges for human trafficking. And then, the victim was tampered with, and essentially she became unavailable. However, because we have other charges pending, other federal charges like production of child pornography, those are the types of offenses where you don't have to produce a victim. But if we didn't have that case, it would be very difficult to, move forward with the prosecution on human trafficking, because it's one of those cases where the victim has to testify, right? Because you're the one that was trafficked. You're the one that was forced or coerced to do, to engage in either these sex acts or whether it's labor trafficking. Unfortunately, these are not the types of cases where we can just go with whatever evidence we have and not, provide victim testimony, because we know that defendants are allowed to confront their accusers in a court of law. So it's important that we make sure that the victims are reachable. And these can be very difficult cases because a lot of victims are transient. They may have substance abuse issues or mental health issues. And human trafficking cases are not the types of cases where you can do your report, make your arrest, and then go about your business. You really have to maintain contact, because if you don't maintain that contact, they're going to believe that you don't care about them, you don't care what happens to them, and they're more likely to resort back to certain behaviors. So it can be very overwhelming because you have to stay engaged, you have to make sure that they're doing okay, constantly checking in with them and rendering services, because it's, this isn't someone who had their house broken into, where, we know where they live, we know that they're easily accessible. Human trafficking victims can be very difficult, even if they're minors. If they're minors, we may know where they are, but they may not want to come to court. They may not want to testify. They may be afraid. So these are different types of victims. They've been traumatized in a lot of ways, and you really have to be very sensitive and make sure that you maintain those relationships, because if they don't trust you, then one, they're not going to tell you the truth about what they've been through. And then they may just, vanish again and resort back to those same behaviors and back to that lifestyle.
Thank you. Danielle, from your standpoint, actually going through the trial prep and everything up to it, what are some important things that you would like victims to know that you incorporate into your work to make sure that, one, they're safe, two, their voice is heard, and three, that overall they receive the services they need during and after prosecution?
So my office has a human trafficking victim advocate, and obviously here in Broward County, we have all kinds of wraparound services. There are so many different programs that are available to survivors of human trafficking. But specifically for my office, we do have a victim advocate who is trauma trained in human trafficking, who understands those kind of cases. And she is just wonderful. Her name is Susie Brown. She is wonderful. She will help walk our victims through the process as far as what to expect, because that's always the biggest problem, is that they don't know what to expect, and for many of my cases, many survivors of these kind of crimes, they think once they've reported it to police, they're done. They don't have to do any more. I have made my report. You have my statement. Why do I need to come in again? And so it's important to give them that information up front. Like, listen, this is what's probably going to happen. This is the process. And unfortunately, in state court, it can take a long time. Defense attorneys are entitled to take depositions, and entitled to discovery, entitled to investigate the case themselves. And sometimes that does take a long time. But for me personally, when it comes time for depositions, and just as an explanation, a deposition is questioning by a defense attorney. Usually in the room, it's going to be me, the victim advocate, the survivor, the court reporter, and the defense attorney. And that's usually it. That's usually the only people that are in the room. But what I usually do ahead of time is I invite that person to my office, or we meet somewhere and we go through everything and we talk about everything. I want them to know exactly what to expect. I explain the personality of the defense attorney. That way they aren't surprised when that person's being nice to them or being rude to them. I do everything I can to obviously protect them during the deposition. As far as, if there is questioning that can be difficult. And what's fortunate though, is that a lot of defense attorneys, I haven't crossed very many defense attorneys who are outwardly nasty. Obviously everyone has a job to do. And when it comes time for trial, again, I don't want surprises. I don't want anyone to be surprised. The first time a survivor goes into a courtroom should not be on the day of trial. So what I usually do is a week before trial, I have another appointment in my office. I go through all of my questions. Every question that I'm going to ask that person on the stand, they're going to hear in my office. It's not going to be a surprise. They're going to know what the questions are ahead of time. They're going to have an opportunity to prepare for those questions and know what they're going to say. They're going to have an opportunity to read through their statements, their depositions. All those things are going to be transcribed in writing, so they'll be able to review it, refresh their memory, because for most of these cases, they're trying to block this stuff out, right? So they'll have an opportunity to review all of that. And then after I go through all of my stuff, we do a courtroom tour. We go to a courtroom, an empty courtroom. No one's there. It's usually just me, the survivor, and my victim advocate. I have them sit at the podium. I have them do a couple mic checks. I explain to them where I'm going to be standing, where the podium's going to be, where the jury is. Because at the end of the day, once you take away all of those factors that are unknown, it makes it so much easier to appear in court. I think the biggest thing for survivors to know is when you do make a report to law enforcement, and you're never going to be alone. Like, you're never going to be alone in this process. Our task force officers are so incredible, and I couldn't do what I do without them, because 90% of the time they have made a connection with that survivor, and they keep tabs on that survivor, and they are present, and they're texting, and they're emailing, and they're in constant communication to provide support for that person. That it makes my job a lot easier, and then I'm just another person added to that support system for them. And it's very rewarding when you can get somebody through the system and get a positive result because of their cooperation.
That's amazing. Yeah, I really like the courtroom tour. That is such a great idea, just because I think one of the biggest like mysteries for people and that make them feel the most nervous is when they walk into a courtroom for the first time. I mean, even when I started practicing law, I remember being extremely nervous when I walked into a courtroom for the first time, and still get that way sometimes in cases.
Same. I mean, I remember I've always wanted to be an attorney, but I hadn't gone into a courtroom until like my first day of an internship. And I remember it being very intimidating. And I was there as an intern. I can't imagine for somebody who's lived such a traumatic experience and now having to relive that experience in front of a jury and in front of a judge, and potentially, and actually in all cases, in front of the person who did that to them. And you just kind of, I do my best to kind of take away all the unknowns so that they're prepared.
That's awesome. That's great. Um, and I just thought about this when we're talking about, preparing them. I think a lot of times the questions that I get from clients regarding reporting is that there's always the fear of, well, I don't have immigration status, or, I have pending charges right now that were related to my trafficking, or, I have a warrant somewhere because of my trafficking. What do you guys say to that? Because I know what I tell them, but I think it would be nice to hear from both of you.
Well, I mean, they're two separate issues, right? So you may possibly have that warrant. And honestly, unless it's for some violent crime, I don't think that it would ever take precedence over the issue at hand. So if you have a human trafficking victim or survivor that's saying, yeah, I have a warrant for battery, it's really not pressing. It has to be resolved.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that can be ignored, but it's not pressing where we would ever, let that take precedent over the greater issue at hand. So there's a way to mitigate those things. There's a way to resolve it. Maybe that client does eventually get booked, but maybe it's handled in such a way where the experience is less traumatizing. Maybe it's the case agent that can take them and book them in jail, or maybe they're just treated differently throughout the entire process. So I can't say that maybe, that person won't be arrested, but there is a different avenue for us to take to resolve that case. And sometimes if it's related to human trafficking, obviously, we have expungement services for victims of human trafficking. So, there are ways to mitigate that, but the task force officers that I work with are really just amazing people. They are compassionate. They know how to speak to victims. They know how to treat them fairly and respectfully. So, and they're really a good group of people. Like even the FBI agents, they come from a place where they're human. They're not robots, and they realize that this is traumatizing. And we know that a lot of human trafficking survivors have lived very complex lives. So it's not unusual that, someone may have a criminal record or may have an outstanding warrant. It's not new for us, but it doesn't overshadow the fact that they are still a victim. And even if we're talking about people that may be undocumented, there's still an avenue to handle that as well. So just because, they may have a warrant or they may be undocumented doesn't mean that they're going to be persecuted or treated any differently than we would treat any other survivor. We would still give them the same services, the same courtesy, and the same level of respect.
Danielle?
I would agree with all of that. I think I usually never even know. Like I don't run my victims through my system to see if they have any warrants or if any open cases. The only time I ever find out is if they tell me, or if somebody flags it and sends it over to me. And then in which case I ask them about it. If it's something that we need to discuss, then we'll discuss it. But if they have an open case with my office, I stay away from it. It's not my business. It's my focus is on the survivor's case. That's my focus. And as far as immigration status, again, that's something that I don't ask. Not something that I'm worried about. And I filled out many U visa applications. Those are available to people who have been in those kind of situations. And I think part of the U visa application requires cooperation. So, and I would say all my cases, I'm trying to think, but yeah, all the cases that I have filled out the U visa applications with my information, it's always been cooperation. They've always cooperated. They've always answered the phone when I've needed to speak to them, met with me if I need to. And I have no problem doing what I can to help them to lessen that trauma, especially if you have that hanging over your head of being arrested with a warrant or deported. Like that's just another layer of trauma. And again, we try to do our best to remove all of those layers.
Awesome. And, that is what I do tell my clients, but I think it's good to hear from both of you as well. Sergeant Johnson brought up expungements. So I just would love to quickly touch on this because I know this is something near and dear to my heart and to Danielle's as well. And I tell my clients this, but I think it's a good platform for us to kind of go through it as well. If a client does have charges in Broward County or past convictions for criminal activity that's related to trafficking, what is your recommendation to them? Like, what do you think they should do?
Every time I've had a case where it's a victim and they have prior cases that involved, their trafficking situation, or they have an open case, I refer them to you. And so I give them your information and I say, she's the one to talk to. And then within within some time, you end up giving me all the documentation that I need to check the boxes that I need to check in order to approve that expungement. So, I mean, and we've worked on cases where there's the active violations of probation, right? Was that you?
Yeah.
Yes.
And we've got, I think, active warrants too, which is why I brought that up, where literally we got those removed and then the case was able to be closed and then we were able to expunge it. And I think it's just that cooperation between offices that really makes it possible for survivors. So yeah, I'm very appreciative of both of you and everything that you do. Is there anything else you want to add? I know it's Human Trafficking Awareness Month. Anything from your offices that you want to add?
Atina, like you're about to say something.
No, you can go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say Happy Human Trafficking Awareness Month.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, it's an awful, horrible crime that it's real and there are real victims, that it's a reality that we deal with every day, that I think there are a lot of myths about what a victim or a survivor looks like, but it can be anyone. And it's, for me personally, it's people that are, here local. They're not foreigners. They're not people that are being, chained up in the back of a truck. It happens. And a lot of times, especially in our cases, Victoria, years go by and then they realize like what happened to them was not right. And what happened to them, what they lived through was trafficking. And, by the time that, you get on the case and then I look at everything, it's so much time has gone by. But when we meet, you can see that just because so much time has gone by, that wound is still there. That trauma is still there. So I appreciate everything that you do, Victoria. And obviously, Sergeant Johnson, you're incredible. I love you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that what we have in Broward County is working. I think that especially when it comes to those wraparound services for victims and successfully being able to file and prosecute these crimes, I think what we're doing is the right thing, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Likewise. I think
Likewise.
Oh, I was say this year the theme is collaboration, and I just can't say it enough, but I'm so appreciative of the collaboration that we have here in Broward County, whether it be service providers, law enforcement, state attorney's office. I feel I can pick up the phone and call either one of you or anyone that I really need and say, hey, I have this going on with the client. They need X, Y, and Z. How can you help? And I always get receptive answers and helpful answers. It's not just like, oh, try somebody else and see what you can get. But I really do appreciate that. I appreciate both of you for taking such a trauma-informed approach to your work. I know Danielle, my clients have told me and literally have cried to me after we gotten off the phone with you, saying how nice and kind you are to them and how you were not what they were expecting when they heard they had to speak to a state attorney or a prosecutor. And so I'm so thankful for that because it really does mean a lot to me and to my clients. And just to kind of touch on what you were saying really quickly, you mentioned that it's never too late. We've had cases, I know me and you personally have had cases where it's been 20 years that they've lived with these convictions, and these convictions affect their ability to get housing, to go to school, to get a job. I mean, it affects every single aspect of your life. And for them to have those removed and to be able to pursue their dreams and really flip the page and start a new chapter is huge. So I'm so
It is.
thankful for you. And Sergeant Johnson, all your work, it just there's no words. I know you are such a hard worker. Your name comes up all the time, and we are so appreciative for you. I know yesterday was National Law Enforcement Day, so thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And thank you both for joining me today for Legal Learning. I hope that this information was helpful to anyone who has experienced human trafficking or knows somebody who is a victim of human trafficking. Please know you're not alone, especially here in Broward County. We are all here to help you. So thank you both for joining me.
Thank you.